David, we've got a show prepared today that I don't know if it's going to blow people's minds so much as plasmify them. How are you, David?
I'm very well. This is going to be very exciting, Jason. Thank you.
Yeah, we had a conversation about this, leading up to the show, where you revealed something new that you've just found that, frankly, David, is so stunning. I really think this is a breakthrough. Why don't you tell everybody what it is that you were telling me about and just take us through it here.
Okay, well, let me just run the clock back. In September the 9th, 2020, just for September the 11th, obviously, the BBC announced that it was commissioning a parallel narrative documentary, 911, the 20th anniversary of, right? And when I saw that, I said, this is actually, I believe, the celebration of a 20-year cover-up by the BBC, the world's biggest broadcaster, which, as you know, on 911 was broadcasting from New York. And on that collage that you've got there, over on the left-hand side, you've got Jane Stanley announcing that they were getting, the BBC, news that the Salomon Brothers building had collapsed, right? So now, going to the center of this image. Now, as you know, this image is taken from the 10 millionth patent granted to a company called Raytheon.
You're talking about this LiDAR image in the center.
This is I think an infrared or whatever that's
LiDAR.
Allows you.
I believe it's LiDAR, laser radar. That's why it's 3D.
Okay. So what's extraordinary is that image must have been taken soon after the devastation of 911, simply because the devastation is still mostly in place, right? The debris piles haven't been cleared. But there is a fascinating building, which is the United States Customs or Treasury building, building number 6, that has got a very different signature as far as the energetics or the explosion is concerned from towers 1 and 2 and towers number 7. And what you'll see is tower number 7 is the debris pile on the other side of a relatively intact set of buildings, right? Towers 1 and 2 are on the other side. And you can see.
David, let's go through this carefully, because this is something that we've looked at many, many times, and what you're about to reveal only became apparent to me last night. I don't know if people can see my cursor, but I'm circling right now what looks like a pile of sand or almost like a melted building here on the right side of the image. It's just like a lump. This was building 7 right here.
Yeah, the Salomon Brothers building.
Right. Then we've got in the center here World Trade North and World Trade South, towers 1 and 2, also looking like melted piles of sand. And then this is the building of interest right here.
Right. It's actually saying my internet connection is unstable. Have I still got you?
You look good.
Okay. All right. So you can see, even if you are not a plasma physicist or an expert in demolition or explosives, I happen to be an expert in explosives from my past career with Schlumberger, which certainly is a company that's highly relevant to one of the guys we're going to name today. But you can see the Treasury building or the Customs House, right, has been blown up by conventional explosives. It doesn't collapse into a debris pile.
Well, and let's just elaborate on that, because it wasn't clear to me again until we went into some great depth. People can see the sharp edges of this building here and the crater in the center that appears to be substantially different than the visual signature of these 3 essentially melted buildings. And the real aha moment for me, David, was when we sort of cross-referenced this image with this thermal image. And this is at a different angle, so it's a bit confusing, right? We are needing to orient ourselves slightly differently with the thermal image, but explain to us what the thermal image is showing, David.
Well, the therming, this is after the event, and I think there's one on the 15th and another one on the 21st, which shows the gradual cooling down of the hotspots. But what's fascinating about the hotspots is, consistent with the firefighters' reports, they said that down in the basement, there were rivers of molten steel.
Sorry to interrupt, David, but I want to focus you on this, because this is what really snapped it into vision for me. We're rotated almost 180 degrees here in that image, but basically here's how I want to orient people with this if we could. Here's the World Trade Center 1 and 2, the Twin Towers. Here's Building 7. In between the two is the Treasury building that we're talking about. So in this rotated image, here is Building 7, identified by A and B. Here are the North and South Towers, C, D, E, F, and G. And here, in between the two, are the Treasury building, has no heat signature like these. So it's got both a different visual profile as far as how it was destroyed. It's got sharp edges, and it appears to have a crater in the center of it. And these superheated destruction sites look like piles of sand, like they've been melted into the ground, while this remains fairly intact except for the crater in the center.
This is a classic example of disinformation, because we're told this is the result of a terrorist attack. But what we're about to reveal to the audience is this was never a terrorist attack. It's a criminal organization, right, that is after something at the bottom of building number 6, down in the basement.
And that's what our chat is asking us about now, David. What was this building? What was in there, right, David?
It's the Treasury building, but down in the vaults are hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gold. So the criminal organization behind the 9/11 attack wanted to make sure that when they went in to get the gold, probably the biggest gold heist in history, by driving trucks along the underground tunnels that would have given you access to the vaults, they couldn't afford to have the vaults full of molten steel, because that would cook them.
Cook the
right?
gold.
So the vault. So they blew the building up with conventional explosives, which are cold, right, after the initial explosion, so they could get at the vault and drive away the gold. And apparently, but there's been a huge cover-up consistent with the BBC's double narrative or parallel narrative techniques. There was a truck stuck in the tunnel full of gold trying to get out, but the tunnel had collapsed on the truck, so they couldn't get the gold out. But basically, it's a classic gold heist by a criminal organization. And it's really interesting. The only criminal organization of note in the New York area today is Huawei, which is facing a racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization charge for the theft of intellectual property. Over to you.
And you've spoken previously, David, about how Huawei, I mean, they're indicted by the Department of Justice for intellectual property theft. And I mean, this is basically the exact allegation that you have issued, and saying that they basically stole Nortel's patents and backdoored it all.
Yes. So in New York, right, they're talking about 20 years or 2 decades of theft from American companies. They don't mention, courtesy, I believe, of Justin Trudeau, the fact that it's probably 30 years. And the first theft of intellectual property that really mattered to 911 would be the theft from Nortel that was taking place in Hong Kong through the transfer of Nortel switchboards and technology into China for the enrichment of Huawei and the Chinese Communist Party. So this happened or started in 1989, and it was accelerated by Canada. But of course, Canada, or at least the Trudeaus, have not mentioned or never mentioned that the theft of intellectual property that destroyed the crown jewels of Canada, i.e. Nortel, was taking place as early as 1989. Over to you.
You know, the thing that's catching my attention about this indictment, David, and I don't know that you and I are properly equipped to evaluate this, but this is in the Eastern District of New York. Now, a lot of people say the Southern District of New York is like the crown jewels of criminal prosecution. I wonder why this is being prosecuted in the Eastern District of New York, which is in Brooklyn. That's the same district where they're holding Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know what the significance of that is, but it's kind of interesting.
Well, let me just go back. I believe what we're looking at is an international pedophile ring that connects compromised nodes. Remember that term? I hadn't heard of the term compromised node until this guy, Cameron Ortis, who was the first civilian head of RCMP intelligence, was arrested, and they started digging into his past, and they found out that he had defended his thesis up at UBC in 2006 under the supervision of Professor Brian Jobe. And the thesis was called Bowing to Quirinus, Compromised Nodes and Cybersecurity in East Asia. So then I asked myself, what kind of compromised nodes would have the effect that people who would be otherwise expert witnesses might be too scared to reveal what the hell's going on? Well, somewhere between 1994 and 1998, the present Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, came to Vancouver and appears to have, with his roommate, Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, founded an international pedophile ring. Now, what does an international pedophile ring do? Well, it allows pedophiles and their victims and the Justice Department that's chasing them to be in contact. And ultimately, it's a very, excuse the pun, penetrative technique of getting a compromised node inside a target government agency, which might be the United States Patent and Trademark Office. It could be the Department of Justice in the United States. In Canada, it might be the Vancouver Police or the Port Coquitlam Police. And of course, in the UK, it could be the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence that would control the root authority for these networks. So we've really got an incredible story now to parallel the BBC's parallel narrative, which in my opinion links Justin Trudeau to the development of a compromised node network that is deep inside the heart of the American intelligence community. Over to you.
Sorry, David, I'm a little distracted by some ignorant individuals who presume they know what you and I are doing, even though they have no evidence and they're just completely idiots. We've got Jim saying that all I want to do is sue, and he doesn't seem to know anything. So we're going to ask Jim to leave because idiots aren't wanted here, and they're very distracting. It's amazing, David. You know, you and I do this show each week, and there's a plethora of really intelligent people who want to look for answers and look for information, and then there are these small-minded people. Some of them might not be social engineers. They might just be legitimate idiots, legitimate malicious folks who think they know everything, and they spew crap into these comments here, and I get tired of it because I do not believe that the CIA would go around and assassinate every single person who is looking at these things and looking at these questions and finding answers. Frequently, what they try to do, as is the case with you and I, is to engage in activities that try to discredit us, kind of like what this idiot Jim is doing right now. They try to sue me ad nauseum to get me to stop doing this without killing me, because if they could prove somehow that what you and I are talking about is not right, or is whatever it is that they try to make it seem, that's much better than killing us, because there'd be no investigation, there'd be nothing. Now, instead of spewing out mystical ideas that come to us from fever dreams, you have developed a remarkable method, David. It's just stunning, because here, in searching the patent office, your regular method, you've discovered a patent for Komatsu, which is a Japanese heavy equipment company. And they, in 1996, patented a system and method for using a plasma arc and thermite to demolish concrete. Can I read you the abstract, David?
Sure.
It says a plasma arc can be employed to demolish a concrete structure with high efficiency while preventing a secondary problem due to noise, flying dust, and chips and the like. The concrete structure can be demolished by melting a surface of the concrete structure by generating a plasma arc from a plasma torch of a plasma arc generator, mixing thermite powder with a supply of gas for the plasma torch, and directing the plasma arc at the surface of the concrete structure. So give us an overview, David, of what this patent is describing in terms of, basically what you've described as a plasma bomb.
Yes, it's essentially the technology for those familiar with the art or skilled in the art. That's the terminology of a patent application, where you don't define all your fundamental terms, because you're assuming that the people reading the patent are familiar with the art which is addressed by the patent. And remember, patents should be novel, useful, and doable, right? So it's obvious that Komatsu has the technology for, well, the words that they use is the demolition of concrete. Now, if you can just flip back to the master collage of the picture, you can see that what's happened at ground zero is that concrete buildings have been demolished, right?
Not just demolished, David. They've been vaporized.
Well, a plasma is not necessarily a vapor. Essentially, a plasma, as I understand it, and I'm not a plasma physicist, is the dissociation of molecules into electrons and protons and neutrons, so they all float away in the breeze. And anyone looking in real time, as recorded by the BBC, of what happened on 9/11, and now looking at this picture, you can see that the concrete has been pulverized or obliterated, and that would be appropriate with the dust that spread, I think, over Manhattan. There were parts where it was 5 inches thick. Now, that's very interesting, because if you have 5-inch thick concrete dust or cement dust sitting on top of a fire, that denies oxygen to the fire and the fire goes out. But as you can see from those hotspots, right, the hotspots continue for, I think, the last hotspot identified on that remote technology sort of disappeared around the 21st of September, I think about 10 days after the attack. So what's going on in those debris piles is something very different from a conventional explosive that obviously took the roof off the gold vaults in building number 6. So we have two different signatures. And what I'm saying is the kind of people who would put, let's call it loosely, the energetics package together to have this effect at ground zero, right, are highly skilled, extremely knowledgeable, capable people. And I believe in my research, there's only 2 people who could have put the energetics package together that would give you this effect on 911. And one of them is a gentleman called Raoul Franklin, who I think was born in 1935. And the other is John Deutsch, the disgraced and probably treasonous director of the CIA, who was fired by Clinton, right? And I always say, tongue in cheek, or not really, that to be fired by Clinton, you've got to be seriously bad, right? That's that smug-looking character on the right-hand side. Now, he's, I think, a physical chemist with a background in thermodynamics. Thermodynamics is the science of what I call hot air, waste, and chaos, which is a great metaphor for politicians, but I digress. But this guy would have the opportunity, motive, and weapon to put together the package that brought ground zero down to ground zero, if you will. One of the things that had to be done with John Deutsch to make sure he was free to design this package is pardon him. So Bill Clinton pardoned John Deutsch in January of 2001, setting up poor, whether you like Bush or not. Bush could never have conceived that sitting within the CIA and its affiliates, which include, I believe, the private equity group, the CAI private equity group, was someone who was planning to bring America to its knees on 9/11. Over to you.
David, this is such an interesting piece of the puzzle that you have discovered or brought back to everybody's attention. This guy, John Deutsch, is such a sinister, let's call him John Douche, because this is a bad guy. What was he put in jail for? Giving top secret stuff to the maid?
No, he wasn't. He was about to be investigated on a misdemeanor charge that he'd allowed top secret information to leak. But just while you just hold it there with that picture, I can see on the second paragraph, and this is highly relevant to the plasma bomb.
Yes, Deutsch Department of Energy.
Deutsch published 2 physical chemistry papers in combustion and flame in 1978, right, on modeling the mechanism of the fuel-air mixture. That is to say, to me, he's perfectly qualified to put together a complex energetics package that leaves certain buildings as debris piles with molten steel actually continuing a very hot reaction under a layer of cement dust, right? And the kind of explosive necessary to blow the roof off the Treasury building so that they could get at the gold and steal the gold in what would have been and possibly was, because there's been no audit of the amount of gold that's lost, right? Possibly the biggest gold heist in history by a racketeering influenced and corrupt organization that they haven't yet identified it, but I believe is Huawei. Over to you.
Wow. So the Department of Energy is something that I think a lot of people don't know about. And they sort of feel like, oh, energy, we all like energy. We want like electricity and stuff like that. But years ago, when I was investigating the Las Vegas shooting, I went out to a town called Mercury, Nevada, at the instruction or advice, I should say, of a guy named Oki Marshall Richards, who I later learned was an FBI informant who was very involved in a number of things that seemed designed to get me arrested. Perhaps I was naive or trusted him too much, but he told me to go to this facility in Mercury, Nevada. And when I went there, it's like in the middle of the desert, and there was a fence and some kind of like town. It was hard to tell exactly what it was, but there was a big, serious fence that said, "Do not enter, Department of Energy." And even though I didn't enter, even just approaching that fence, an SUV sped up towards where I was from inside this compound. It had to be going like 100 miles an hour. And the guy got out, and it was a Department of Energy vehicle. But David, look at this shield. What does it remind you of?
Well, some of the shields of the livery companies in the UK, but what else?
It looks a lot like this, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But then, yes, that's true. That's true. Right.
So I think it's basically the same. The Department of Energy seems to be somehow pretty closely associated with the CIA, and our buddy John Deutsch was employed in a variety of different positions there at the Department of Energy. Certainly plasma stuff and all that seems like the types of things he would be involved in. He several positions at the Department of Energy, Director of Energy Research. So I like this idea that some sort of sophisticated technology that we've never actually seen before, except on 9/11, could have caused this. People have spoken about nuclear bombs and DEW weapons, but here you've got a patent from a Japanese company talking about using thermite and a plasma arc to basically plasmify concrete. And you're also talking about John Deutsch, who was pardoned by Bill Clinton, who, David, the pieces appear to be coming together.
Absolutely. And this is the fascinating thing, because what you and I are doing, and I keep emphasizing this, is we have developed a parallel narrative analysis that allows us to analyze the BBC's parallel narrative analysis by reverse engineering. You see, because when the BBC talks about a 20-year anniversary, next year that documentary is going to come out. It's going to be a parallel narrative document. Over the next months between now and when that comes out, you and I effectively, almost whether we like it or not, are looking at the assumptions made by the BBC and and this is vitally important, what kind of compromised node networks were in place to prevent the witnesses declaring what they really saw at the plasma fields of 9/11. So the BBC, and it goes back to World War II, of course, are masters at parallel narrative or double cross attacks using compromised nodes where they have agents in place to deflect the crime scene investigation, remove evidence, plant evidence, etc., such that the public at large, which is listening to the BBC, a weekly audience of 100 million people, that is reached by the BBC, where you and I, bless them, we reach 1,000 people, 10,000, 5,000, in a manner that, of course, I think is actually extraordinarily brilliant because of the input we're getting from our subscribers. But we are actually on a track to reverse engineer the BBC's celebration of 20 years of cover-up after 9/11, which is quite a privilege, if I may say so.
Yeah. David, this is, to me, perhaps one of the most stunning breakthroughs that you've made because, again, the patent, it tells us what the capability is. And it does seem to very closely match what we saw there on September 11th, 2001. This patent was issued in 1996. I mean, various elements of this device could have been in the elevator shaft installed by Ace Elevator. It could have been in the KC-46 that hit the building. There's a lot of ways this could be delivered.
Absolutely. But it has to be done in parallel with a compromised node network such that the people witnessing this equipment and these explosives being installed are too frightened to reveal what they see. And the master of the compromised node network, I believe, is Justin Trudeau, the present Prime Minister of Canada, whose roommate at UBC or subsequently, Christopher Charles Ingvelson, was charged, arrested, and jailed for directing an international pedophile ring. Well, if you're the roommate of someone who's directing an international pedophile ring, what are you? Co-director? I mean, if you see my point.
You'd think he would know about it.
Of course he would. Now, what I think has happened, and what these guys are very skilled at, is I believe Christopher Charles Ingvelson is the patsy. He's gone to jail, but the guy who really knows how to implement a global international pedophile ring to connect up compromised nodes deep inside the heart of the Canadian government, the US government, in fact, the Five Eyes countries, is Justin Trudeau.
Sorry, David. I'm sorry to interrupt, but in looking at this article about Christopher Charles Ingvelson, I don't think I really thought about it in these exact terms prior to right now, but he's a former teacher at an elite Vancouver private school. This is exactly the same way that they had placed Jeffrey Epstein. He was in the Dalton School, which was an elite private school. And when they say he's arrested for child pornography, is that sort of the same as Jeffrey Epstein's child rape being officially reported as, soliciting prostitutes or whatever? They seem to kind of like change it to some lesser related charge.
Well, let's look at some extremely powerful, influential compromised node. There's the compromised node in New York with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who's an alumna of Oxford University, who flies a helicopter, and she was pimping for him, and she's under arrest. Right?
Allegedly, we haven't seen a single picture of her there in jail, and she's under arrest in the same jurisdiction as the Huawei indictment.
Right. And then you have Cameron Ortis, who wrote that paper, and I believe in 2006, supervised by Professor Brian Jobe, right, who's a professor of political science up at UBC. When he wrote that paper, he was analyzing an existing situation, bowing to queeriness, which is a euphemism for bowing to authority, listen and obey, compromised nodes, and cybersecurity in East Asia. So I think Cameron Ortis had already identified, perhaps by checking out his supervisor, that Huawei had got inside the cybersecurity of Canada, the United States, the Five Eyes countries, and actually was using compromised nodes to acquire intellectual property or steal intellectual property for its use in the 9/11 attacks right through to the present day, which is, I believe, colored by the Dominion voting frauds, where the machine that was used to count the votes is capable of, let me get the exact title, electronic correction of voter-marked paper ballots. Every American who was involved in these recent elections, I mean, the hair on the back of their neck should go up because it says electronic correction of voter-marked paper ballot, patent number 8844813. And if you read the abstract, there is no indication that after the machine, probably using artificial intelligence, has decided to correct someone's ballot, that alerts and asks for the authority of the people who put the ballot in, marking perhaps a vote for Donald Trump, but having the machine switch it to Joe Biden. I mean,
David, sorry,
am I missing something here?
No, you've got it, but you've actually jumped ahead a bit because I wanted to just ask you quickly about when you were talking about Cameron Ortis. I don't know if you've noticed this small surprise that I've included for you in today's collage. Up in the upper left-hand corner, we have this guy, what's his name, Job, receiving some
Brian
sort of
Job.
award. What's his name?
Brian Job, and he was the supervisor of Cameron Ortis. And
right, and
apparently
he's receiving this award from, this is for Japanese something or other, and Cameron Ortis is talking about compromised nodes in the Far East.
Yes, and the most likely driver of these compromised nodes for the use of Huawei to steal intellectual property. And the big problem for America is not so much that Huawei is accused of stealing intellectual property, but they've granted the operation of the United States Patent and Trademark Office to Serco, which would be in a position to give Huawei the intellectual property. Because remember, on November the 17th of last year, Serco proudly announced it had processed, using artificial intelligence algorithms, 4 million patents for the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So, for example, what I think is you've got traitors within the United States government, as we have in Canada and the Five Eyes countries, who are actually handing over the levers of government to Huawei and the Chinese Communist Party, aided and abetted by people in the academic community, what David Rockefeller would call, I suppose, the intellectual elite, which in 2001 generated two guilds that became livery companies that are absolutely fundamental to the attempt to overthrow the government of the United States on 9/11. One of those was called the Guild of Educators, right, whose first master was Ralph Franklin.
Wasn't it the Worshipful Company of Educators?
Well, it's now the Worshipful Company of Educators, but it's still known as the Educators. And these are the faculty members, right, presumably around the world, in the United States, New Zealand, where Ralph Franklin came from, incidentally. And the other livery company, or it was a guild back then, is the Guild of International Bankers, right? So the Guild of International Bankers.
You can follow them on Twitter, David. I'll do that.
Right, right.
Not that many followers.
No, but wait till we've finished with them, right? You see, because on 9/11, on the 47th floor of the North Tower, World Trade Center North Tower, was a meeting of Serco shareholders, where it seems the educators were represented by delegates from USS, which is the University Superannuation Scheme that covers the pensions of faculty in the United Kingdom, and is a 48 billion pound, I guess that's about $100 billion in the United Kingdom. And over in the United States, we have TIAA, Teachers Insurance Annuity Association, which would cover the pensions, presumably, of people like John Deutsch. So these people, the educators...
And Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, and Michelle Obama, and Hillary Clinton, right?
And Bernardine Dawn, and Bill Ayers, right? So you've got, I believe, a community of treasonous members of faculty in the Five Eyes countries, aided and abetted through Huawei's compromised node network, I believe, or allegedly believe, that was built by Justin Trudeau, whose father lectured at the University of Montreal, whilst he taught drama at the junior school up near UBC.
I want to address some of the comments that are coming through, David, because we've got a lot of good comments in addition to the social engineering and irritating ones. Someone had mentioned that Pierre Trudeau was down with Edward Heath, and I found this, National Archives of the UK, messages between the Prime Minister Edward Heath and Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. This is an interesting thing for people to look through. They're sending messages. I guess they're sort of down, hanging out, doing whatever. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about, David, because we've had another comment about this, and this was super interesting. We spoke about this briefly last night. They cleared away that steel so quickly and melted it down. Not only melted it down, but they made it into this USS New York. And you've told us about this before. I found it odd. Why the hell would they do that? But One good reason is if you just melted it down and made, cars out of it or whatever, the possibility exists that somebody could track down that steel, who melted it, where it went, etc., and investigate and maybe find some chemical evidence of plasma or whatever, thermite, I don't know. But by turning it into a Navy ship, certainly barely anyone can get access to this ship if you're not in the Navy. And if the US military doesn't want to investigate, microscopic residual chemical elements in this ship, nobody's getting anywhere near it.
Yeah, and this comes back to my concept of artificial intelligence vector analysis to look at the movement of assets through a crime scene, both victim and criminals. So now what happened to this, the master contract for cleaning up the ground zero eventually got to Bovis, right? Now Bovis built the 911 memorial. And here again, I just don't understand how Americans can be deceived into accepting the idea that a British company should get the right to clean up the evidence at ground zero and build the 911 memorial. Perhaps it's because they don't understand that Bovis in 2001 became an installer for Nortel, right? Nortel's wireless and fiber optic links that were embedded in the World Trade Center and I believe used to trigger the plasma bomb. So the British company, Bovis, gets the contract actually, I believe, to upgrade the Statue of Liberty or repair the Statue of Liberty, build the 911 memorial, which is that great hole in the ground, right? What do they take out of the hole? They take out evidence of the steel having been modified through various phases by a plasma bomb. And where does that steel go? It goes to smelters in India and China. I'm feeling tempted, except we've got the rest of the show to deal with. I rest my case, Your Honor. Why would they send the damn steel to China to be smelted down and returned to the United States to be put in this frigate?
So that people can't track the evidence.
Spoliation, spoliation. And that is the characteristic signature of the criminal organization responsible for the destruction of the World Trade Center on 9/11. It is not a terrorist organization. It's staffed and populated by traitors, primarily within the intellectual elite and international banker community. And going back to Serco, which runs your patent office and your National Visa Center and the Defense Red Switch Network and the Defense Ammunition Center. I mean, what haven't the American government or its leaders handed over to this British company, Serco? There's not much that really counts, right? And Serco shareholders that met on the 47th floor of the North Tower included the two big intellectual elite pension funds, USS, which is 48 billion pounds under management, and Teachers, which is $1 trillion under management, the biggest private pension fund in the world, together with 10 major banks with $100 trillion of assets under management. So my solution for America, if I may be so bold, is to link Huawei, which is already facing this case in Brooklyn, with Serco that would have provided them with the intellectual property that they would otherwise have had to steal, right? Remember, Serco has processed 4 million patents for the United States Patent and Trademark Office, including, I believe, some of the interesting patents that we've been addressing recently, such as the electronic correction of voter-marked paper ballots that was used, I think, to swing the election from Donald Trump, who I think was heading for a landslide victory, over to Joe Biden. And what they've been told, the people, Giuliani and Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell, is they've been ordered to say they're going after, trucks carrying paper ballots in. And that's a diversion because they're going to look stupid because the fraud was actually conducted electronically with no paper trail, right?
But David, it seems like there is some, the way these voting machines work, it seems there is some interaction between the paper ballots and the electronic fraud that enables the electronic fraud. I don't disagree with what you're saying, that Lynn Wood and definitely Sidney Powell are being led down blind alleys by someone, but I don't know that it's a blanket dismissal of their pursuit of these paper ballots. I think there is something going on with paper ballots. We've seen videos now of USB sticks being exchanged in clandestine ways. I think there's a lot of different mechanisms going on. When people say hack, David, there's this image of somebody sort of sitting on a computer and hacking directly into something, but you can hack all kinds of things. You could hack a soda machine if you figure out that, pushing some array of buttons and then putting in a Canadian nickel makes a soda pop out. You've sort of hacked the soda machine. It takes me back to this Bloomberg article, David, because, historically there have been dopes and social engineers who come into these comments and try to cast doubt on what we say. But here we have Bloomberg, for people who think we're conspiracy theorists, this is a mainstream reporting source, saying, did a Chinese hack kill Canada's greatest tech company? They're the ones saying that Nortel was hacked. Do we think this was an ethical hack, David?
No, it certainly wasn't. It was theft on a scale that most people can get their hands around. And it began in 1989 when General Alexander Haig went, and I'm using this is my words, to celebrate the Tiananmen Square massacre, right, in China. Now, this is the former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. He's a member of the CAI private equity group, right? And I believe the CAI private equity group is a euphemism for the CIA, set up by the CIA as a front. And the CAI private equity group accelerated the transfer, with three of its investors being Nortel directors, of Nortel's intellectual property to Huawei in China. So in a sense, it's ironic. Huawei didn't so much steal the intellectual property, it was given it by corrupt traitors within the United States and the Five Eyes countries' government.
The thing I was getting at with the ethical hack question, David, is that if there is my understanding of what was going on between Nortel and Huawei is that Huawei was building equipment for Nortel under license or something like that, right?
No, it was competing. So it would do a knockoff. It would take the Nortel design equipment imported from Hong Kong, re-engineer it, and then using lower cost of production, subsidized by the Chinese Communist Party, to compete with Nortel at much lower prices. But then it expanded into Nortel and started developing the Nortel software used in projects like the prisoner tracking of jabs. So by 1995 or 1996, when I believe Justin Trudeau was building an international pedophile ring with his roommate to place or insert or infiltrate compromised nodes in key government departments in Vancouver, up at UBC, and in the United States, essentially there was a man in the middle attack by Huawei on Nortel's management and directors, and they started building or providing the service offered by Nortel to, for example, the Department of Justice with joint automated booking system. So by 911, I believe Huawei was tracking the prisoners or parolees that were moved into position at the various crime scenes, not terrorist scenes, but crime scenes in New York and in Washington, including the Treasury building with hundreds of millions of gold down in the vaults. So this was a criminal heist. It was not a terrorist attack by some long-bearded wonder straddling a yak in a cave in Afghanistan. Over to you.
Yeah. It's interesting, David. I mean, when I just look at the people who are trying to criticize the show, it speaks to, you've spoken, David, about tracking narratives to identify characters and tracking characters to identify narratives. And there are a certain number of characters who pop up around our show when we talk about certain things that give us hints as to what their motives might be. They don't want us talking about this.
Yeah, no, let me run the clock back, because now we're actually engaged in, how shall I put it? Is it a fight to the death? I think it may very well be, Jason, a fight for the survival of the Republic. Now, there's a Latin phrase, I think, fraus vitiate omnia. That is, fraud vitiates everything. So even if in 6 months' time we find that these Dominion voting machines executed or help people execute a fraud on the election, then the election becomes null and void. And these people, no matter, it just means it's going to be a lot more difficult as Biden's in place. But I digress.
Exactly.
Right. The point is, what we have to do now, for the sake of our public, if you will, is help them narrow the field down of characters that are key to the plasma bombing in World Trade Center complex and the Dominion voting fraud. So I've got a list of 6 characters that I believe with those 6 characters, we can generate, you and I can generate a parallel narrative. I'd like to think that we could do it in a documentary, but the point is we're doing it anyway. And some of those characters appear in this collage, but I'll mention which ones, very important. But I believe now, at the end of this part of the show, I want to identify 2 characters that are absolutely germane to the next part of the show, where we start reverse engineering what the BBC is celebrating as the 20th successful cover-up, 20th year of a successful cover-up of the 9/11 attacks. So it's now 10:46. So I'll just pick out the 2 characters. We've mentioned John Deutsch. Remember, he's the disgraced director of the CIA, who was believed to have compromised CIA operations by having unclassified documents on his home computer that was accessed by an alien human being who was not an American citizen. And I believe that was someone that was sent out by British intelligence to look at what the CIA was doing. He gets pardoned in January of 2001. He has the expertise and knowledge to design a plasma bomb package for the World Trade Center, which is totally consistent with the debris pile at the World Trade Center, including the cold hole above the gold vaults of building number 6, which is the Treasury building. He's also, and this is very important, a director of Raytheon and Schlumberger. Schlumberger employed me as coordinator of artificial intelligence and geoscience research at the research center, and I was a delegate to the 81 conference where I first understood the power or recognized the danger of character tracking to understand narratives, if you will, where the AI is taken over. So John Deutsch is a critical character. And remember, Raytheon got the 10 millionth patent that was demonstrated with the image that you've got up on the collage. So they got that 10 millionth patent, I believe, was it last year or the year before?
I think it was like 2 years ago, something like that.
18 years after the time at which that image was taken. Right?
It's strange.
So he's absolutely, well, for me, it's a cover-up of a criminal operation. So the other character, if you go back to the collage, is this kind of...
show people this whole U.S. issues 10 millionth patent thing.
Yeah, okay, sure.
And here it is.
So that went to Raytheon. Why would this, I think, what was the date of that? Can you see what the date?
June 20th, 2018.
Right. So 2 years ago, they celebrate the 10 millionth patent, Raytheon director John Deutsch, and they show that image. What the hell are they doing? You know what? They're laughing at you. They're laughing at you, Americans. They're saying, look what we can get away with. We've got the disgraced, fired CIA director, a probable traitor, right? A director of a company that did this. So that message can go to Giuliani, says, or even Donald Trump. This is what we did in 2001. Just think what we could do next year. Except that they've got a much more powerful weapon than a plasma bomb, which is a digital virus. But anyway, I digress, right? So going back to the collage, the other character that I believe is one of the 6 characters that will allow us to reverse engineer the parallel narrative being produced by the BBC for release next year as the 20th anniversary of the cover-up is that amorphous looking guy over on the left. That is Alfred Hermida. I don't know if you can pick him out with your
Why
your
is
mouse.
he amorphous? He looks like Alfred Hermida.
Well, for me, he looks, it's like, there was a film, I think, with Peter Sellers called Being There.
It's not his legs. I added the legs.
I would have, no, I don't know that. But anyway, I'm sure he's a very nice guy. But when the BBC produces a parallel narrative documentary on the events of 9/11, this guy is very critical because on 9/11, he was working for the BBC. Not only was he working for the BBC, he was the founder editor of the BBC online news desk, who had evidently, from 1997 to 2001, adopted the patterns that are described in the Trump template, right, which would allow the BBC, particularly including that spoken text display apparatus for the generation of television signals, to generate a parallel narrative for the 9/11 attacks, or the bombing of the USS Cole in Aden Harbor, or the East African embassy bombings.
Hey,
So
David,
this
sorry,
guy,
real quick, I've just noticed something. It's
what?
quite hard to tell, but here we see Alfred Hermida. This is his webpage.
Right.
And the thing is, he's giving some kind of presentation. We can tell that this is a television camera based on the type of lens it's using. It appears to me, David, that it's got a teleprompter here. This could be a spoken text display apparatus. It's a little hard to tell, but it could be.
Absolutely. Patented by the BBC or applied for on the 3rd of August, 1998, 4 days before my birthday, and 4 days before the attack on the US East African embassy bombings. So Alfred Hermida, he left the BBC, he joined faculty up at UBC in 2006, which is the year Cameron Ortis defended his thesis, bowing to Quirinus, compromised nodes and cybersecurity, when I believe Justin Trudeau and his roommate by then had built an international pedophile ring with compromised nodes in every significant government department, starting with the city of Vancouver, the province of British Columbia, the federal government of Canada, the Department of Justice in the United States, the UK Ministry of Defence in the UK, where people within those compromised nodes would be too terrified to speak out about what they saw that would otherwise explain to Americans what really happened, the real narrative and the real characters of 9/11. So I believe Justin Trudeau, he's not shown on your collage, but Alfred Hermida, right, and John Deutsch are key to understanding the real narrative of 9/11, which is essentially the BBC generating a fake narrative to divert the people away from what essentially back in 2001 was a conspiracy between an intellectual elite represented by the Guild of Educators and world bankers represented by the worshipful company of international bankers, as described by David Rockefeller.
And not only that, David, I know you're aware that David Rockefeller appeared on the cover of, this is really interesting. I know a lot of people know about this, but it's worth mentioning again. Rockefeller appeared on the cover of Newsweek in 1960, April 1st or April 3rd, 1967. And I believe he's talking about the construction of the World Trade Center. People have noted that his watch is pointing to 9/11. That's quite odd.
That's fascinating, yes, yeah.
And Newsweek, David, you'll recall, was owned for a time by Barry Diller's IAC. Totally coincidental that it has the same initials as CIA. Totally coincidental that Barry Diller has Chelsea Clinton on the board of this $2 billion thing, even though she has no knowledge about technology or business. And it's also totally coincidental that those guys run Vimeo, and we've exposed various different things about their operations. They've destroyed the Vimeo channel, but it's back. And we will be starting our sponsor exclusive segment, David, in just about 5 minutes. So people are going to be able to join us on subscribestar.com/reverse-CSI, patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, or subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. We've got about a minute left, David. Anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe alumni of any alma mater that they love or respect or would like from a reputational point of view to clear from this racket, right, should be looking at asking the administrators or the governors of the enterprise, right, have they accepted any money from Huawei? And what's the quid pro quo? Because what Huawei has been doing is been buying intellectual property or patents from faculty at major universities and using it for tracking victims or suspects of crimes, for example, where you can actually commit, I believe, a face crime, under rather Orwellian, where if your expression is not consistent with what the artificial intelligence algorithms would believe that you're being loyal to the administration or queerness, is you can be arrested for having the wrong expression.
Wait,
So
David, no, a face crime in 2020 has taken on a new meaning. If you don't have your face covered, that is a face crime.
You got it. You got it. And Justin Trudeau helped set up that Imagist Technologies facial recognition system in Vancouver. I'm absolutely convinced. I believe that he helped put together the racket where women were abducted from the downtown east side and either tortured to death in the studios of Starnet or out at the pig farm. So Justin Trudeau is one of the 6 people that I believe is absolutely fundamental to unwinding or unraveling the parallel narrative that's going to be put out by the BBC next year. Over to you.
And we've had a commenter, David, ask us if it's true that Justin Trudeau is Fidel Castro's son. We don't know definitively, but we've looked at a lot of photographs. We've looked at video of Margaret Trudeau with Fidel Castro, speaking about Fidel Castro. There seems to be a lot of evidence to indicate that there is a high probability that Justin Trudeau is the biological son of Fidel Castro. We don't know. David, we're going to reveal who these 2 very important characters are and carry on with the conversation in just about 3 minutes on Patreon and Subscribestar. So I hope that people will join us, and I look forward to seeing you there, David.
Thank you, Jason. Bye now.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you over at Patreon.